Carbs are king when it comes to high-intensity sports. During CrossFit and Hyrox, nearly all energy that is required to move the muscles is coming from carbohydrates. Because of their high-intensity nature, both Hyrox and CrossFit causes the muscles to burn carbohydrates fast. In this video, I will explain the best fueling strategies for sports performed under high intensity, so you don't hit the wall during your workout. I will explain the dose, the timing and the source of carbohydrate intake before and during training, and I will explain the differences between CrossFit and Hyrox. So if you are like me and you like carbohydrates, this is a video you don't want to miss. Alright, let's dig into it. Hi everyone, I'm Gomar. I'm a senior scientist at ETH Zurich, based in Switzerland. And for the last decade or so, I studied the interaction between nutrients and exercise and how those affect muscle biology. But lately I've been more and more involved into the science of high-intensity sports, such as CrossFit, but also some Hyrox. So as stated in the introduction, carbs remain king when it comes to exercise performance. For example, take a look at this beautiful overview study where they listed 55 studies looking at the increase in performance with carbohydrates, so during exercise, compared to a placebo. And they also looked at different exercise durations, going from 10 to 15 minutes to longer 4 to 5 hours, your typical marathon style duration. First of all, you can see quite clearly that overall carbohydrates increase exercise performance when you take them during exercise, endurance exercise in this case. And also, the longer the event or the longer the duration, the more benefit an athlete has with extra carbohydrate intake. So why is that? Why does the body seem to prefer carbohydrates as a fuel compared to, for example, fats or even proteins? And then we have to dig into a little bit of biochemistry, because if you want to shift chemical energy, glucose or fats, into mechanical energy, you need obviously O2 to burn, for example, a molecule of glucose. And if we want to burn one molecule of glucose, just look at the chemical reaction, you need 6 molars of O2, which yields 32 molars of ATP, which is the energy unit of the muscle cell. And that ATP is used by the muscle for muscle contraction. That's a whole nother video. So ATP, think about it as the energy currency for the muscle cell. Then you can also burn fats, right? The other way of converting chemical energy, fats, into mechanical energy. And to burn 1 molar of palmitate, which is a form of fat, the cell needs 23 molars of oxygen, so more oxygen, but also yields more ATP, in this case 106 molars of ATP. So clearly the capacity for fats to store chemical energy is much higher. But what about the efficiency? And then it gets interesting, because what is limiting during exercise? That's obviously oxygen or oxygen delivery. So how much ATP can we get for 1 molar of oxygen by burning glucose or burning fats? And indeed, the efficiency of burning carbohydrates is much higher, 15% higher compared to burning fats. For 1 molecule of oxygen, you get 5.33 molars of ATP with burning glucose, while you only get 4.61 molars of ATP by burning palmitate or free fatty acids. So the efficiency by burning glucose is much higher. When I'm sitting here and I'm doing this video, my oxygen delivery is not really limited, right? So my body would prefer fats, or mostly fats. So I'm on the left side of the curves. But once I start doing more and more heavier exercise, I go out for a run or I do CrossFit style movements, obviously the amount of oxygen that will be delivered to my muscles is highly limited. So you want to be as efficient as possible with available oxygen, so you get the most amount of ATP or the most amount of ATP per time unit. And that is exactly what is happening here. And that is why during exercise, and certainly during high intensity exercise, you want to have the available glucose for your muscle to convert this chemical energy into mechanical energy or movement. Another reason why carbs are king, certainly during exercise and also before, is because you only have a limited storage capacity. So what do I mean with that? Glucose, or carbohydrates, are stored in the form of glycogen. You might have heard about that one before, in both the muscles and the liver. And that capacity is limited, meaning that you only have approximately 100 grams in the liver and around 500 grams in the muscle. It depends a little bit on the athlete and also male or female, but that are like ballpark numbers. And it's important to understand because that's only 2,000 to 3,000 available kilocalories for your body to burn down those glucose. Right? Because the glucose that is stored, let's say, in the blood, that is circulating in the blood, is only 5 grams, so very, very limited. Why is it important? Take a look at this study. It's a study that I'm a bit nostalgic about. It's from 1993, and back in the day, they did very, very nice studies, I think. So they had 4 different groups, and this is just to showcase how important glycogen is and the glycogen storage before exercise. And that's also how I can give you some recommendations later on, right? Because I try to be evidence-based here on this channel. So they have 4 groups, very simple. So first of all, they had to do a bike time trial of, let me see here, 70 kilometers. So quite long, more than an hour of hard biking in the lab. And then they had 4 groups. One group received carbohydrates and also had high glycogen stored in their muscles. So they ate a lot of carbohydrates before the days before the trial actually started. Second group had the same, obviously, but they didn't get any carbohydrates during the ride. So they had a lot of storage, but they didn't have any exogenous carbohydrates. So that's the black group here. Then you also have the purple group who started with low glycogen. So they actually had a low glycogen ketogenic diet on the days before the trial, but they received carbohydrates during. And then the last one obviously had the worst of all worlds, meaning that low glycogen and also they didn't get any carbohydrates during the trial. And you can already immediately see that the high glycogen, high carbohydrate group did the best, and then it just falls down. And certainly when they started with low glycogen, also didn't get any carbohydrates during, this was actually the worst of all. And they kind of found the man with the hammer after 40 to 50 minutes. That's when the glycogen stores are getting depleted. So that shows that it's very important to start your exercise, certainly when it's of a longer duration, with high glycogen stores. So how fast does this glycogen depletion or this decrease in glycogen go? And here they have done some work on this. So what did they do? They just measured the glycogen storage in a muscle biopsy before exercise and after exercise. And then they had the subjects doing very intense exercise, like CrossFit style, really above your VO2 max intensity, or at your VO2 max or a little bit lower intensity. And then also here you see the green bars or the green lines, which was very easy intensity, like walking or easy jogging. And obviously the intenser the exercise is, the faster the depletion goes. And that's very important to know, again, for later on making some recommendations related to glycogen and how many carbs you have to do. So if we talk about recommendations, I want to differ between Hyrox and CrossFit. Why do I want to do that? Because it's actually quite interesting that Hyrox is obviously some sort of CrossFit, but it's much longer in duration. And related to carbohydrate intake, this actually has a large effect. So that's why I also want to differ between the 2 sport modalities. So how do you gonna attack, for example, a competition day in Hyrox? You can look at it as a competition, but also, for example, a big training day where you want to have fully repleted glycogen stores and really want to have full energy to do high quality training. It all starts already with the dinner. So the day before exercise, and even maybe 2 days before exercise, you want to take in around 4 grams per kilogram body weight of carbohydrates. I'm just talking about carbohydrates. I will give some information on fats and also proteins later. Just talk about carbohydrates to make it simpler for you guys. So 4 grams, that's quite a lot of carbohydrates, right? Like I weigh 85, so that's whatever 320 to 350 grams of carbohydrates that I have to take in during dinner. This can be complex carbohydrates, so starches. It doesn't have to be candy like simple carbohydrates, but rather, yeah, potatoes, grains, and so on, right? So with also some fiber, that's fine. Then obviously you sleep, and then you go for your breakfast. And let's say the Hyrox competition is, this is just hypothetically, at 10 a.m., right? So you can also shift this, it doesn't really matter. You wanna finish your breakfast at 8 a.m. or maybe 8:30 a.m. So well before the race starts, because you wanna empty everything that is in your stomach, and all the glucose cannot circulate in the blood, but actually has to be provided towards the muscle as glycogen, right? Stored as glycogen. Here again, quite high carbohydrates 3 grams, 2 to 3 grams, even 4 grams if you can handle this. This a little bit depends on how well you're trained in eating carbohydrates. And this can be simple carbohydrates. Why? You don't want to delay gastric emptying with, for example, high amount of proteins or fats or fibers. No, you want to get rid of those carbohydrates into the bloodstream, into the muscles. Then a mistake that many people make is that people just right before the start drink a bottle of Gatorade or eat 2 bananas because they think they don't have enough energy, right before the start. This is actually not a good idea because of 2 reasons. First, the glucose that you eat or the carbohydrates that you eat, they end up in the bloodstream and not necessarily in the muscles as glycogen. That's already probably not the good way because it takes a long time before those glucose molecules gets synthesized into glycogen. It can take up to 24 hours even. So you don't want to just eat a high amount of sugars right before the start. That's one, let's say, not optimal reason. But the second reason could actually be a little bit dangerous, and this is all to do with exercise-induced hypoglycemia. It's a difficult word for saying that you can actually go low in blood glucose, not high, low, right when you start exercise. Why is that? For example, you drink your Gatorade, 60, 70, 80 grams of carbohydrates right before the start. Obviously, those glucose molecules, they enter the bloodstream, blood glucose goes up. What does the pancreas say? We don't want this. We want those blood glucose out of the bloodstream because it's a limitation of our homeostasis. So what happens? Insulin production by the beta cell. At a certain point, you have high blood glucose, high insulin, but then you start your competition, for example, your Hyrox competition. Full gas from the get-go, really fast, hard contractions of the muscle. Then blood glucose obviously gets soaked up by the muscles because they need the glucose. And together with the insulin, there could be actually an overshoot where you decrease so much that you go below homeostasis levels. And that's what we call a rebound hypoglycemia, where you feel dizzy, weak, and fatigued. And that's exactly what you don't want. Maybe you've experienced this before. I experience this actually quite a lot. When I eat a lot of carbohydrates and then I just go out for a run or a walk, I sometimes feel like super dizzy, and that is probably because of this. So that's not a good idea. Don't take your carbohydrates right before the start. No, eat them well before, during breakfast, 2 hours, even 3 hours before. Then we have to talk about protein, right? Most important is don't eat too much protein even at the breakfast because it will just delay gastric emptying, so emptying of your stomach, and delay the amount of glucose that will be converted into glycogen. Keep those proteins, high amount of proteins, after the race because obviously then you need it for recovery, and then that's also no problem for your gastric emptying because you obviously are in recovery modus. So proteins, limit them also in the dinner before. It's not really necessary. Focus on carbohydrates. Fats, don't eat too many fats as well in the breakfast or during the breakfast because again, this will delay gastric emptying. Not necessary, keep them for after the race. Hyrox is, unlike CrossFit, it is long. It is 60, 90, maybe even longer for some people. So we have seen in the previous graphs that after 45 to 50 minutes, if you don't take in any carbohydrates, your performance and your wod-science, your intensity starts to go down. So if you are trained for it and you can actually handle it, I would suggest to eat 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour of Hyrox racing. Because first of all, you do, I think, have the time for it. For example, eat a quick gel when you are working out. And second, it will improve your performance. So if you can, and if you want to train for it, I would highly recommend doing that as well for Hyrox. So let's look at the recommendations for CrossFit. CrossFit is similarly as Hyrox highly dependent on, let's say, glycogen and glucose metabolism for energy production. So you need a lot of glycogen when you start CrossFit. But unlike Hyrox, you cannot eat carbohydrates and you don't need to eat carbohydrates during a 10-minute workout. That doesn't make any sense. So how are you gonna attack, for example, a big training day or even a competition? Again, dinner, high amount of carbohydrates. Make sure that you eat at least 3 to 4 grams per kilogram body weight of carbohydrates. Then breakfast, very similar, a high carb breakfast with mostly simple carbohydrates. You don't need many complex carbohydrates, certainly not for a competition. And then again, no carbohydrates before the start of the first workout. And let's say you have 3 workouts, which is a typical competition, a day competition or even a weekend competition for many elite and also sub-elite athletes. During the workout, you don't eat any carbs, but in between workouts, you have to eat a substantial amount of carbs. Again, we recommend 60 to 90 grams per hour of competition within the workouts. Again, here we're more focusing on simple carbohydrates because simply those will be digested quickly and will get into your bloodstream, into your muscles the quickest. So that's the difference, I would say, between Hyrox and CrossFit is in Hyrox you can actually eat carbohydrates, mostly simple carbohydrates, during the competition, during the race, while in CrossFit it's more in between the workouts, depending a little bit on how many workouts you have. And obviously, if you need to go again the next day or the next weekend day, yeah, you also have to eat carbohydrates afterwards for recovery. Not the topic of this video. I will make another video on recovery and how to recover optimally using optimal nutritional strategies, but that is clearly also important here. And then there's a lot of people coming to me and saying, yeah, Gomar, it's very nice, your recommendation of finishing breakfast 2 hours before your competition starts, Hyrox or even CrossFit. I cannot do that because first of all, I'm not always competing, that's correct. And most of the times I'm actually training very early at 7 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m., right? Really early. Then I have 2 recommendations. If you're really, really early, like at 6 a.m., you can actually skip breakfast given the fact that you ate high carbohydrate dinner the night before, because then you will still have high amount of glycogen in the muscles, not really in the livers, but in the muscles, that will help you to get through a workout, 1 or 2 workouts that morning. On the other side, if the competition starts at 8 a.m. and you cannot obviously wake up at 4 a.m., you could do that, but most people won't. And you actually don't have that much time between your end of the breakfast and the start of the competition because, as I said, it starts very early. You can actually decrease the amount of carbohydrates you eat according to how much time you have before the start of the competition, for example, during the warm-up. So if you have 4 hours, I would go for 4 grams per kilogram. Again, that's a lot of carbohydrates. 3 hours, 3 grams per kilogram. That's always a good rule of thumb. 2 hours before competition, 2 grams per kilogram. And then 1 hour, so very short, before 1 gram per kilogram. Don't eat, again, a high amount of carbohydrates right before start of exercise. That's never a good idea. So these are some rule of thumb that you could use for yourself during those competitions. Protein intake, I would say that's basically the same CrossFit and Hyrox. Don't go for a high amount of proteins right before or during the breakfast. Eat a little bit of protein, but not more than 20 grams, I would say. And again, if you have multiple workouts with a short time period in between, again, avoid eating too much protein and keep those proteins for after the last session or also a bit during lunch, but mostly after the last workout, because then you can use those amino acids more for recovery and to build up muscles and even partly glycogen reserves. That brings us to the end of the video. I here made, let's say, an overview table that you maybe now, if you want, you can pause the video and have a look at it. I will also put it as a PDF in the description, so you can also download it for yourself. It's completely for free. That takes into account the intensity of the exercise, for example, very low, medium, and super hard, like competition style, and the duration, smaller or shorter than 90 minutes, for example, CrossFit style, or longer than 90 minutes or longer than 60 minutes would be your Hyrox competitions. And then based on that, the amount of carbohydrates that is recommended for you to eat during or before the competition. It basically summarizes what I just said related to the recommendations for Hyrox and also CrossFit. And then there's one more nugget that I want to provide you guys. Sometimes people come to me and they say, man, your recommendation of eating 90 grams of carbohydrates during high intensity sports, I just cannot do it. When I do it, my stomach gets full, bloated, gastrointestinal discomfort and so forth. And that's probably true, because research has shown that you can only maximally absorb 60 grams of glucose per hour. And that is because the glucose transporters in the small intestine to actually transport the glucose from the small intestine towards the blood get saturated above 60 grams. So how do you get those 90 grams in? That is by adding 30 grams of fructose. And fructose is also another simple carbohydrate that uses a different transporter compared to glucose. So you can actually add those two together to get towards your high amount of carbohydrate intake, 60 to even 90 grams per hour. And related to that, and to put also some of the science or the theory into practice, I've been collaborating with the guys from CrossFit to make, let's say, a brand new supplement for CrossFit athletes to top up their carbohydrate intake and to optimally add both this glucose and the fructose into their supplement regimen to improve overall performance. It's called Empower, and it's unfortunately now only available in Switzerland. But if you are an affiliate owner and you're thinking, man, I need a carbohydrate drink in my box because it's all these no carbohydrate things, and Gomer has told me that you probably need some carbohydrates before, during and after CrossFit style workout or Hyrox workouts, then I think Empower would be a good solution because it's actually evidence-based and has the right constitutions of carbohydrates. You can just check the link down in the description. You can get 10% off of your first purchase, and also we get a little kickback which we can then use to also improve the content of this channel. So that would be highly appreciated. So that gets me to the end of the video. If you stuck around until now, thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about the physiological differences between Hyrox and CrossFit and how you should train for both sport modalities, just look at the video right here.